I am thrilled to welcome back to the stage Dr. Sam McKenzie and Jonathan Scatia. Sam was introduced yesterday, but since we have some new faces in the audience today, I want to reintroduce him because his work beautifully bridges the gap from what Pat just shared with us. Because in his clinical practice and research, Sam specializes in pediatric neuromuscular conditions, including running clinical trials for gene therapies in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. He brings that exact expertise in cutting-edge genetic therapeutics straight to us as a fierce, long-standing advocate for the TANGO2 community. He currently serves as the chair of our scientific advisory board and as a member of our board of directors. So we're incredibly lucky to have his guidance and his heart in this fight. Joining him will be Jonathan Scatia. He's a community psychologist and implementation scientist specializing in systems change, health equity, and AI-enhanced dissemination. He's the founder of PubCrawler and This Week in Public Health, where he develops innovative tools that translate complex research into accessible, actionable insights for practitioners and communities. His work focuses on bridging research, practice, and policy to improve health outcomes and strengthen community-driven systems. Please welcome me in joining back Dr. Sam McKenzie and Jonathan Scatia.
Okay. A hard act to follow. So good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Before we really get into sort of the meat and the content of today's sessions, we wanted to really hear from the people who matter most, and that's you all, the TANGO2 community. So before we came together today, we sent out a survey a few weeks ago that was designed to understand not only the research questions that families care about, but also what might help or prevent participation in future studies. So the findings from that survey that I'm going to share today are not meant to be the final word. Rather, they're a starting point for discussion and a way to ensure that our research agenda continues to reflect the priorities of patients and families. And knowing that there's 170-ish people in this room means that you probably responded to the survey. We had a huge response rate to this. So this is really important because we know historically research priorities are often set by researchers. These are things that are cooked up in labs and guide the types of questions and the types of directions that people go about. This particular project started by listening to families first, by trying to identify the things that are important to you and then communicating those up to families. So, there's sort of the bottom line up front here, which is that there was near unanimous agreement that, people thought that having the family's voice is important, that there is an interest in being an active participant, not just an active listener, but an active participant in future research, and a readiness to participate. So, our goal is to say, if the people in this room are ready to engage, how should research respond? So, overall, the responses that we received reflected a really broad cross-section of partners. So, about a third of people were caregivers living with people with TANGO2, and another 20% were angel families, which was the first time we included the voice of angel families in this research. And about 1 in 5 respondents were healthcare professionals. We also had, a mix of researchers, students, and trainees. So while the family are the dominant voice in this information, as they should be, we're also hearing from professionals who diagnose, treat, and study this disorder. And really, this diversity gives us the confidence that these results are going to reflect the broader TANGO2 ecosystem. So, families are interested and they are ready. Nearly everyone that we surveyed said the family voice is very or extremely important. Just as importantly, nearly everyone also felt that patient-centered research is something that really reflects community values. So this tells us that the trust between researchers like Sam and families is already strong. And perhaps most exciting for the future trajectory is almost everyone that we asked expressed interest in participating in future research, with nearly as many saying they would be ready to participate if, and we're going to be hanging on that word, if opportunities matched their needs. So to me, this is a really, really strong signal. The challenge is not convincing families that research matters. The challenge is creating opportunities that fit within your lives. So, of course, enthusiasm and excitement is not enough. And there's already a lot of enthusiasm and excitement in this room. So we need to understand what gets in the way. So the biggest concern is not a lack of interest. It's that old, challenge of time. People are already balancing complex medical care, work, school, everyday life. Beyond that, several themes emerge around trust and communication. People want to know, well, who do I contact? Is my participation actually going to make a difference? And what are the potential risks going to be? The encouraging part, though, is that these are barriers that we actually can address. Better communication, clearer expectations, and thoughtful study design can reduce many of these concerns. So naturally, we then ask questions in the opposite direction. So if these are the barriers to research participation, what would make it easier? And these answers are remarkably consistent. Families, you all, overwhelmingly asked for flexibility, flexible scheduling, flexible opportunities to participate remotely, like some of our friends online today, and assistance with travel. But they also emphasize something equally important: transparency. They want clear expectation of risks and benefits. And what they want to hear from researchers is what was learned after the study is over. What was the point of it all? In other words, families don't simply want to contribute to the samples or be a data point. People want to be partners throughout the research process. So, we need design that fits within real life, not the other way around, not trying to create systems that get in the way of the daily challenges that you all experience. So flexibility, remote participation, and travel support reduce these burdens. Transparency, communication, and sharing study results strengthen trust. So our challenge is not recruitment. It's about building lasting partnerships. And, us all sitting in this room right now is just an incredible signal of that relational trust. So once we understood participation, we asked about research priorities. And one thing really stood out, which is almost everyone was asking about identifying the biological markers as a priority. And as it turns out, yesterday, for those who were at the scientific symposium, we heard quite a bit about those biological markers. So this tells us that families are looking for tools that can improve diagnosis, monitor progression, and eventually help to evaluate treatment. Beyond those biomarkers, respondents prioritized understanding the underlying biology of the TANGO2 protein, energy metabolism, neurological function, vitamin metabolism, and what triggers metabolic crises. These priorities align remarkably well with many of the scientific presentations that we heard and will hear throughout this conference, which is an extremely encouraging sign because it means the research community, of whom there are many here, and the family community are moving in the same direction in a harmonized way. Families also reminded us that TANGO2 affects the whole person. So while in terms of symptom priorities, neurological symptoms ranked highest, it was very, very closely followed by cardiac and metabolic issues, with developmental and behavioral concerns not far behind. So this tells us that rather than focusing on a single organ system, respondents are emphasizing the need for comprehensive research that is reflecting the whole spectrum of living with TANGO2. That whole person perspective should continue in how we design future studies. So before I hand it over to my colleague Sam, there are really sort of 5 key points that we learned from you sharing. So first, this community is ready to engage. There is a ready to share stories, to share lived experience in a way that informs future research. Families want genuine partnership, not enrollment. So not being a point on a run chart, but rather including those experiences as part of an ongoing conversation in research. 3, many of the barriers that are identified for research participation are just practical, which means they can be addressed through better study design. These are not insurmountable challenges. 4th, families are eager for research that deepens our understanding of the biological sources of TANGO2 while moving us towards meaningful clinical advances. And finally, they reminded us, that is, you all reminded us, that success will not come from solving one symptom at a time as if it is a checklist. It will come from understanding TANGO2 as a whole person condition. So ultimately, I think this is actually like a really optimistic set of information we gathered. One, because we had over 170 people respond to this. So that's engagement in and of itself. But it also tells us the science is advancing rapidly and the community is eager to move forward with us. So if we continue to design research with families, not for families, with them, we will be in the strongest possible position to make meaningful progress. So with that background about what you've shared with us, I'm going to pass it to Sam to tell us where we're going next.
Okay, so what do we do with this information? I just wanted to give one illustration of work that the foundation has been leading with all of our clinician partners, not all physicians, some dietitians. And, I think the anecdote that may resonate in this room, your kid is sick, your kid is off, your kid is having one of these episodes. What do we do, right? The foundation and Dr. Miyake's group has started this TANGO2 hotline so we can kind of accommodate rapid response to some of these emergent situations. But really there's become a need, a very clear need, I think, in the past few years to codify some sort of set of recommendations or guidelines. What do we do with my kid having seizures in the ICU? What do we do about these movement disorders? What's the right dose of vitamins? And John just talked about patient partnership. All of this work was really embedded in the patient experience, and we had family partners as we went through this process. So I'm going to give a short talk on an ongoing project that's approaching the end, and that's our clinical consensus guidelines. So apologies if this isn't the right color scheme here to be read in the back, but we wanted to basically focus on these acute episodes, acute presentations, acute symptoms that occur in TANGO2 deficiency disorder. Really, that includes what we call paroxysmal neurological symptoms. So paroxysm just means something that comes and goes. So that might be a weakness episode, dystonia, ataxia. Your child takes a nap and things might recover. Obviously, the crises, which have really, we've seen a reduction in metabolic crisis with the advent of vitamins, which has been fantastic. But not every child is diagnosed, and there's still questions as to optimal management in the setting of the undiagnosed or TANGO2 suspected individual. Cardiac monitoring. So if somebody's outside of crisis, to what extent do we need to continue monitoring, and what does that workup look like? Metabolic stabilization, anesthesia. So this has come up especially with a lot of our older patients with TANGO2. They need a procedure. That's a very scary experience to be going in. The anesthesiologist obviously has no familiarity with this disease in 99% of cases out of 100. And we wanted to kind of codify some guidelines around anesthetic management. And then the big one, even though it was 1%, I'm going to call that a survey artifact on one of John's slides, optimal vitamin dosing. It's a big outstanding question. So to get the experts in the country and the world, because we did have some international participants, we wanted to really rev up our kind of weak sauce vitamin guidelines. Right now it says RDA or above. I think there's a growing consensus that we need more than just what's recommended for an individual without TANGO2. So what did this process look like? We started with the review of the literature, and as you probably might guess, there's not a lot of randomized controlled trials in TANGO2 deficiency disorder, but we compiled all of the available case series, case reports, odd presentations, this is how we managed, this was the outcome. We put all that together. We assembled expert subgroups, and we had 3 working groups. One was neurology, one was cardiology, and one was called genetics, ICU, nutrition. We added anesthesia, so that's our GAIN group. And then we also had caregivers of individuals affected with TANGO2, and they participated in this process where we took all of that literature, we made it available to the working groups, and then we started drafting guidelines. And so when I say guidelines, I'm going to use these terms interchangeably, guidelines, recommendations. Technically, these are recommendations. Guidelines has its own definition in the medical world. We don't have a lot of high quality evidence in terms of those randomized control trials to stand on. So this is largely clinical consensus, right? And then we did something called a modified Delphi. So this is where we take a recommendation and people look at the pros of that recommendation and they grade it based on how strong is it, how much do they agree with it, and how clear is it. And they were allowed to leave feedback on those recommendations. And so each of these working group leads went back and enough. So in neurology, we use a lot of seizure medications that might have side effects, such as prolonging QT intervals. So those aren't things we want to use necessarily if somebody's in crisis. Is that loud enough? Good. Okay. You can see the cardiology, how do we manage these arrhythmias? A lot of work from Christina's team, but we've also had some experiences around the world where, we're learning more about the medications that are most effective during cardiac crisis. And then everything I talked about, genetics, ICU, including, when do we consider genetic testing? What patient populations might warrant more expedited testing? And then again, at the bottom, the B vitamins. So this was the timeline. It's been a lot of work, and it's happened pretty fast. This has all been in the last year. So we started our literature search. There's an excellent medical student, Ashton Ariola, who really led that effort, sorted all the literature into these working groups. We assembled our working groups. They started drafting guidelines last fall. We did another literature search just to make sure we got all of the publications that had been released over the interval. And then we had a really fun in-person summit in Houston in December, which I'm from Rochester. It's great to go to Houston in December. I don't know that I'd like to be there now. And here's some of the people that were participants. Some of them are at the conference. So there's Kuntal, there's Dina, you can see Christina, Josh over here, Robin. So a lot of people in this room have been strong participants in this effort. We started our first round of voting in February, and credit to John for kind of leading that effort and data collection. All of our working group leads went back to the drawing board with that language. We did a second round of voting in April, and now I'm very happy to say we have a set of recommendations that we feel pretty confident about submitting for peer review. And if anybody's interested, there's a poster out in the poster room that you can see the draft recommendations. I should say, again, these are not peer-reviewed at this point, but you can see all of them on that poster. So here's just a few of them. So I didn't pick all of our recommendations just to kind of illustrate the work product here. So rapid molecular testing for TDD should be performed in individuals with unexplained rhabdomyolysis. So here's some of the things that should trigger testing. Metabolic crisis, metabolic stabilization. A lot of conversation still around nutrition. If you're on something like TPN, should you get lipids? There's not consensus that I can say we have across the board 100% for all of these things. So part of the strength, I think, of this publication will be highlighting some of those remaining unknowns that we still need to work out. And just to highlight the one at the bottom, we did have consensus that there's still no data, right? We don't have a high dose versus low dose cohort where we followed over 5 years and we can say the high dose did better than the low dose. But we do know that we stand by it. B5 and B9 are beneficial in this disease. And we did, with this set of guidelines, recommend an increase in our floor of B5 to 50 milligrams daily and an increase in B9 to 400 micrograms. I know a lot of patients in this room are on more than 50 milligrams and maybe more than 400 micrograms. So these are the floor, and I think we're going to have pros associated with each of these recommendations that will say something to the effect of, individuals have done better on higher doses without adverse effects. So we also recommended, obviously, if you're on these and still having symptoms, that's probably not adequate, right? We need to go up on the vitamins, and that's really an ongoing area for our clinical community and scientific community to work on. So just to mention the next steps, we are trying to get this get this manuscript together. It's going to go back for revisions within our whole working group of individuals. We're going to be presenting these data at the 22Q11 conference where we heard from Don McDonald-McGinn yesterday. There's a lot of interest in TANGO2, and it's really nice to have a partnership with another rare disease and learn from each other. I'll just mention the poster again, and I just wanted to thank, in particular, Josh Meisner, who is our cardiac working group lead, Kuntal Sen for neurology, and Lena Gonzalez, who was our GAIN group leader. But really, I think we had 23 clinicians and dietitians participate in this effort, and I just wanted to say thank you to all of them. Thanks.